Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you because in the end, the most limited resource is time. And the fact that you want to be here with us sharing this experience is something to be grateful for. It's an act of gratitude from you to us, and I hope these sessions meet your expectations. For us, just being able to be here is a real thrill. I want to thank the farmers who are the core and the fundamental engine that drives us, and also the technical team that makes it possible for us to be right there with the problems in the field, with the farmers, and with this Almeria model, which has shown and continues to show that it's at the forefront and leading the way. In my opinion, on a global level, what is done here isn't done anywhere else in the world. We're going to start with the first presentation, which I'll be giving, and for that, I want to count on you. And it starts with a very simple question. How many of you have ever stopped to think about what nature does to grow forests so that those forests remain for so long? They were here before us and they're still here. In the end, the title says it very clearly, which is how we can regenerate that greenhouse that we've been farming for so many years, how we can make the Almeria model keep working so that neither the model nor the system runs out in the future. That's where the word regenerative comes from, because the benefit this method gives us is being able to restore what that soil and that way of farming once had. The greenhouse adds value. In Almeria, it has allowed us to be the garden of Europe, and it's a model that cannot falter. Thanks to the daily work of all the farmers and the company technicians, we're able to keep this model growing and ensure it remains a global benchmark. You might ask, who are these people? I'll summarize it in one word. We are bio, and we truly believe in bio. We believe that the Almeria model was one that has yielded excellent results, and we think that a way to make it even more sustainable, to help protect the environment, and to allow the model to keep growing is by fully adapting to what the environment gives us and to what we want to remain in it. That's why we're bio. We believe in this project. I want to thank my partner, Jose, who is here with us today. 24 years ago, we came up with this idea and we thought it was the way to contribute our grain of sand to this project, which is the Almeria Greenhouse Project. We are present in many areas. But I'm not here to talk about us. Rather, I want you to get an idea of who our company is, what we do, and beyond that, we are completely open to any need, any question, to being able to show you our model in a real way so that you can join this great family that we already are. We are present 12 months a year in many of the large retail areas of Almeria and at a European level as well. If you're curious, check us out on social media so you can understand a little bit more about what we do. I'm here to talk to you about why the greenhouse is a complex model. Here, in a very simple way, without getting into looking at big things, on a daily basis, there are 15 variables involved in decision making approximately that are made every day. I think that here we aren't aware of the work that is done at the greenhouse level and at the decision level. Decision making in a greenhouse is not simple. Why? Because we have external humidity, we have internal humidity, the winds come, the rain comes, the sun comes. And that makes everything a living system at the level of environmental control. That's why what the greenhouse does is a modification of the environment. We are capable in this Almeria of being able to modify the development conditions of our crops. What are we seeing? That the effect of recent years' temperatures and torrential rains, the phenomena are increasingly extreme. We have to keep moving forward with this model. That's why we have Alberto's part, who is the one who will help us make better decisions regarding temperature and humidity and solar radiation, both what enters and what the greenhouse is able to retain. In the end, I won't go on too long, but for whoever wants to learn a bit more, I insist that you can get in touch with us and keep moving forward in this area. Then there is another fundamental element, which is the soil. It's an element that is there, it's opaque. We don't really stop many times to think about what our soil does. What our soil does in the end is maintain a balance so that our plants can live, can feed themselves, can extract those nutrients, but it's a system that is totally alive. And that's what we're going to keep fighting for and defending, because a living soil system is balanced. It's a system that's capable of giving us everything the plant needs without extra inputs. And this is FICO's part as their specialists in this area, where they have a lot to contribute and a lot to say. Then there's another element that's gaining a lot of relevance, which are the biological control organisms, which is the part Ainhoa will tell us about, as she also has a lot to contribute to us in this part. And in the end, inside the greenhouse, what we have to look for is a balance and an ecosystem where our good bugs can live. And just like any living being, they really do need a place to call home, somewhere they feel safe and comfortable. When it comes to the reservoir plants, that's actually something important that we need to have already established and growing in our greenhouse before we even start thinking about planting the main crop. And here I want to give them their moment in the spotlight, since they're the ones that really help us, so that when there's a problem, they provide the house, home, and food for our insects. And then comes the nutrition part. Because a plant that isn't well nourished, well, it's not a healthy plant, but rather it endures stress, and that's not good for a plant or for anyone. Then at the end, if you have any questions during the roundtable, you can ask us, as we're happy to answer you. If we really want a complex system to be a system that can be worked in a simpler way. Here I'm going to highlight the farmers' work and the value of the technical teams from all the companies we have in Almeria, and I'll just give one fact. Almeria is, on a global level, the province with the most technicians per square meter. In other words, what does this mean? That a technician in Almeria visits from 14 to 20 hectares. If we manage to do this, control all the variables, and have technicians and farmers support each other, the system becomes easy. Here, regarding nutrition, there's one word that's fundamental, and that's balance. If there's no balance, as in any aspect of life or in any area we work in, things don't work. And to achieve that balance, we have to know what our plant extracts, what our soil has, what we're going to provide, and how we'll make that soil little by little become enriched and not lose its fertility. Fertility is the sum of the nutrients our soil has, plus all the associated microbiology. In this way, what we're going to do is have oxygenated soil with a well-developed structure. This will make it easier for our roots to grow comfortably, and that will translate into higher production, better quality, and greater peace of mind for all of us who work in the greenhouse. How do you achieve a regeneration of the natural environment inside a greenhouse? Well, we have to fulfill three main factors. First, if we look at the forest has plants. Those plants are our main crop, plus all the ones we're going to incorporate, which have a purpose and a reason, because they'll help all our beneficial insects to be permanently in the greenhouse and outside of it. In that way, what we achieve is that we replicate what nature has been doing for many years, and we can achieve it inside and outside the greenhouse. For all this to be possible, if you look at forests don't have plastic, but our greenhouses do. But the advantage we have is technology and the way we can control both the climate and the management we do of temperature, humidity, and light, which are the fundamental factors we have to consider so that we can carry out correct control of the climate, humidity, temperature, and light inside the greenhouse, our soil. Our soil, that really is an element that is very rewarding the moment we dedicate time, management, and the addition of organic matter are all important. Yeah. We also need to reinforce the soil with products that help activate it, so we can regenerate that soil. The soil will have more and more diversity, and diversity is a guarantee of future success, both regarding pest control and production. Here's an example of reservoir plant and banker plants, because they're complementary systems. They're systems that have to be permanently inside the greenhouse. They have to be part of our main crop, and we must give them the importance they deserve, as they are what really ensure that all the associated problems don't materialize in a way that leads to significant economic damage. This doesn't mean that the bad bugs will disappear. That's not the case. Now that we're going to coexist with them and create a balance, which is what nature does, I can assure and guarantee you that's how it is. Reservoir plants give us shelter, they give us a home, they provide nutrition for our bugs, and they allow them to reproduce inside the greenhouse, which is what we're really looking for. Regarding the climate and nutritional control part, there will be a presentation later, actually two, where they will explain in greater detail everything that can be done. Here, I just want you to take away the key concepts, which is that we must have control over the light. The plant needs light to carry out photosynthesis. Photosynthesis generates the carbohydrate that then allow it to have energy to consume and develop flowers, and later the fruits. We have to maintain control of the relative humidity because if we don't have conditions where the plants can grow and develop in the most optimal way, we are losing production. This is closely related to temperature, which in the end, the two variables combine and it's the VPD. And if anyone has doubts, Antonio can explain it to us in a very clear and simple way. Regarding conductivity, in the end, plants need to feed, and we are going to provide them with those nutrients they need to be able to complete their development in the most optimal way. Soil moisture has a direct influence since we could be wasting resources if we overwater, and if we fall short, what happens is that our plants suffer and are subjected to stress. And finally, we must maintain the balance between what the soil has and what the plant needs. Why do we firmly believe in regenerating the soil? Because in the end, we maintain fertility in the long term. This is something we have to keep in mind, that we cannot consume the resources today, but rather we have to maintain them so that those who come after us can continue feeding off those soils and so they don't get depleted. If a soil is depleted, in the end, both phytosanitary and nutritional problems arise. We have to reduce the dependence on chemical fertilizers and instead take advantage of the soil's own chemistry and make sure that the soil can have it available through organic matter and the microorganisms that activate the release of those chemical elements that the plant needs. If we manage to do all this, in the end, the health of our crop improves, production also improves, quality improves, the damage that occurs is much less, and there is a greater utilization of the product in the marketing companies. The idea, as in any process, is to maintain stability, and to maintain stability, balance must exist. If balance does not exist, stability will not be possible. So we are going to work hard, all of us here, to promote sustainability, to promote balance, and that will be reflected in a better economic result and leaving our soil and our planet in a much healthier state than it currently is. So I'll leave it here clearly that a living soil is not an expense, it's an investment in productivity, in plant health, and in future profitability. With this, I want to thank everyone. I hope you found it interesting. And I'll say again that we're open to any questions. And if you'd like to visit the company and the facilities, we'd be delighted for you to do so.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this talk, which, well, as Miguel already said, time is gold, and it's rewarding to have so many people here with us. I'm going to give you some keys to biological control, especially applied to organic production, but it's true that it can be applied to conventional farming. And I want to highlight the fundamental role that climate control plays in this biological control. Okay, well, traditionally, biological control has been associated with organic production, as I say, and especially with the mass release or to varying degrees of natural enemies inside the greenhouse. But the reality is that many nuances must be made, and numerous factors and objectives come into play. The main one is the protection of the environment, which we must never forget about. Because by using other more conventional strategies, well, we know they degrade it more quickly. And on the other hand, the recovery of the soil's original environment is the key piece, and above all, maintaining fertility while looking toward the future. I want to show you an image of a living soil. As I say, it's from a farmer who gets advice from MJ. He's been in organic production for over 15 years. And thanks to these types of strategies, well, you can find structures, organic matter percentages, and species that aren't commonly seen in our greenhouses. Here we have, well, the earthworm, which, as I say, well, it's very difficult to find in a greenhouse. I'm not even saying conventional, but even in organic production. And finally, another objective is the promotion of biodiversity, both inside and, if possible, in the areas immediately surrounding the greenhouse. I want to show you two images. The first one is of a reservoir and banker plant design from a typical greenhouse that we see every day. in which, well, you have to keep in mind that you must introduce numerous species of these reservoir plants. It's useless to use just one, like lobularia, which we all know, but rather biodiversity must be provided because each species will have benefits and will provide each natural enemy with things that are specific. And in the second image, seeking balance within the greenhouse, as I said, with climate control and the installation of good biodiversity, we can ensure that our natural enemies are established before the actual pest appears. This is an eggplant crop where reservoir plants had been introduced 1 month before the actual cultivation began. And the moment the first pests appeared, in this case aphids, which didn't even affect entire plants, it was just one plant that had 2 or 3 leaves with aphids. And we can see that there are more Aphidolytis larvae present than the actual pest itself. So what we are looking for is a balance between the pests and the biological control organisms. And above all, that we have the enemies established before the crop starts. The benefits we'll find with this strategy are numerous, but above all, plants and products with fewer chemical residues, which will be less stressed, favoring a faster response from the immune system of the crop itself. We're going to have natural production from the plant itself, as I said, not only against pests, but also against diseases, and better yields in the long term. This strategy cannot be seen with immediate results, but since it must be season after season, it will provide us with even greater sustainability and also greater profitability overall. I want to show you some data because, well, of course, everything must be justified. In this case, to show just how important climate control is inside a greenhouse, let's consider the story of a farmer who chose to use the Himarcan system. He put it into practice during the 2023 to 2024 season, and his experience really demonstrates the value of effective climate management. And the data collected was solely humidity, well, among many other things, but the control performed was window management and relative humidity management. Not much more was done. Regarding light and shading, and he managed to increase production by more than 10,000 kilos on average between before having it and after having it. Here it is, he installed it here, and in the 24-25 season, which was the last one we had, well, he managed to exceed 10,000 kilos more than in previous seasons. But above all, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that the product quality improves. And in this case, we can see it in the waste percentage. How it's evident that from the installation and that climate control, very simple, as I said, it's not a high-tech greenhouse. The waste dropped 2 points from the moment of installation. This data is quite encouraging. As I said, nothing high-tech, just the most basic stuff there is. The use of biological control must be understood as a long-term strategy and the search for a balance. But it makes no sense to do this once the first pests appear because we'll just be chasing the problem the whole time. If they do show up, well, you have to take other alternative measures that can be used in those cases, but the benefits will not be as real as when it is done properly. What we're always looking for is to use preventive methods. It will allow us, well, to make more money overall and to have a much better established and more robust auxiliary fauna in our environment. And many of you might be saying it's very complicated with so many things to consider, but I want to show you it's not. First, let's differentiate between aerial and terrestrial auxiliary fauna. Generally speaking, aerial auxiliary fauna adapts better inside the greenhouse between 14 and 24 degrees. We're already controlling light and shading, and it usually adapts well to the whitewashing done for the crop. And above all, the most important thing, controlling the relative humidity. That really is fundamental and should be kept between 60 and 80% most of the time. And on the other hand, terrestrial auxiliary fauna, which isn't as well known. We have, now I'm going to tell you about some species that can be used. But the most important thing is for organic matter to exceed 2% as much as possible. But if not, we've seen it adapts well to soils at 1.5%. The soil must have a good structure, it can't be compacted, and it can't be dry or waterlogged either. It has to be optimal conditions for each species. These, as I said, are general ranges. On the other hand, we're also going to need, as I said, a good design of banker and reservoir plants. On one hand, flowering plants and non-flowering plants. Normally, the most used crop is barley, which is infected with aphids of a similar size to those affecting our crops, which is Rhopalocefum padi in this case. These plants must be introduced into the greenhouse 1 month before the crop is transplanted. Otherwise, well, it makes no sense because, as I said, we'll be chasing the problem. And from there, once we have our aphid established, well, natural enemies will be introduced, like Aphidius colemani, for example. And on the other hand, well, flowering plants, these are fundamental. There have to be numerous species. As I said, one isn't enough, with different heights, different amounts of pollen and nectar, which will provide them, well, with shelter and food, allowing for second generations, which are the ones that are truly adapted to our greenhouse conditions. And here I want to give you some names of species that you can use. They are generalist organisms that can be introduced preventively and will last in the crop. As always, it is recommended that they be released in the reservoir plants themselves, which is where they will have their most adapted environment. For the aerial part, for example, mites like Swirsky or Californicus are recommended depending on the temperature, or lacewings, Aureus, or Aphidius. They are easy to adapt and they are generalists. And in the substrate, they are less well known, but there are mites such as Hypoaspis, or beetles such as those of the genus Atheta, which are predatory species of Thrips pupae. They also work for Thrips parvispinus. And by having a good system, a good balance within the greenhouse, other natural enemies will appear. Spontaneous ones that will come in from outside, such as Feltiella acarisuga, which many of you will have seen if you have read Spider Mite Problems. It is a great predator, and this campaign is working quite well. And Athena is also an aphid predator. But this only happens if our crop is free of pesticides and residues, because otherwise it will be very difficult to find them. And finally, I want to give a few brief points about two pests that have been attacking us in recent campaigns. The first of them is Thrips parvispinus. I want you to take away the message that to combat a pest, you first have to understand its cycle. And this is the main problem it presents to us, because it has two stages in the soil. That is why pesticide treatments have so little effectiveness. In the end, whatever stays in the soil will at some point move up to the plant, and we will never be able to get rid of the pest. Everything must be taken into account. Unlike Frankliniella occidentalis, which is the thrips we've had for many years, it also has a part in the soil, but also one on the leaf, and the leaf is where it's preyed upon by Aureus. In this case, 80% on the leaf and 20% in the soil. So it's very difficult for us. What happens is that in the winter months with low temperatures, the cycle of Thrips parvispinus is longer. There is a better establishment of natural enemies, and it is easier to combat it. But in late transplants, especially in the months of September and October, when the plants are small, well, we find this damage. The conditions we have in those months are high temperatures, in many cases over 30 degrees, very low relative humidity, there is a lot of airspace and little mass foliar, which makes the climate very difficult to control. There are low levels of natural enemies in cases where they've been released, because most haven't released any yet, and the cycle is faster. The strategy that we've been using, and I want to give you a fact, is that in this campaign and the last, not a single farm in MJ was cleared due to Thrips parvispinus. It's to use a strategy preventative with biodiversity, not doing massive releases of natural enemies, but dosing them 2 or 3 times. If at some point we have to release 9 individuals per square meter of Aureus, then do it in 2 or 3 times. And attack each one, leaving 7 days in between. And attack at all stages of the pest, not just with Thrips parvispinus, but with everything. The first thing to do is sit down and think about what its cycle is. When it comes from the nursery, check the trays very well to ensure they're free of parvispinus. And at the time of transplanting, or in the nursery trays, perform releases of soil mites like Hypoaspis, or once transplanted Atheta. At the time of transplanting, if we find any outbreak, isolate it with a thermal blanket and cover the ground with blue sticky traps, so that the moment the thrip falls to the ground, it gets stuck there, and that's going to help us. And if any phytosanitary treatment needs to be done on the outbreak, then it should be done and delimited. We also advise in those outbreaks the use of entomopathogenic fungi like Boveria bassiana or Metarhizium. And second, the red spider mite. I want you to take away another key fact, which is that the red spider mite reproduces with very low relative humidity, between 20 and 40%. It has a very fast cycle, and in just 3 days, its population can double. However, the most effective strategy against this mite is increasing the relative humidity in the environment to between 60 and 80%. These are also the optimal conditions for releasing Phytosciulus persimilis, which is its main predator. And if our crop is free of residues, we'll favor the entry of Feltiella acarisuga, the larva I showed you before, although it can also be bought. And finally, I would like to take a moment to mention to those of you online, if you have not yet registered, I strongly encourage you to do so. By registering, you will receive the presentations by email, as well as a small downloadable resource we have created here at MJ, which includes some important tips for organic farming so you can understand a bit more. The greenhouse system, the complex system. Those of you here in person will receive it by email. You have the email here, so if you want to write it down, either I or any of my colleagues will answer you.
Thank you very much, first of all, for attending. Oh, but it's true. There's time for this, okay? For attending and for spending your time on these talks, which I believe will be very interesting. On the other hand, I'd like to thank the FICO group for inviting me to these sessions, to this first technical conference, which I hope will be the first of many, where I'll be talking about fertigation, climate control, and also about data for high precision agriculture. Okay, my name is Alberto Lázaro. I'm the owner or CEO of Himarcan. I'm an agronomist and I have over 20 years of experience. And I believe in an agro system that is sustainable, right, and real. And Himarcan is a company that's been around for more than, well, it's been 45 years working on fertigation control, climate, and technical greenhouse management. And it was one of the first companies here in the Almeria region to introduce sensor technology. First of all, before starting to talk about irrigation, climate, and everything else, I want to be a bit empathetic with the current situation you farmers are facing. What we are seeing is that water is becoming an increasingly scarce and expensive resource. And this trend is continuing. Inputs are also getting more expensive, especially now with the ongoing conflict in Iran, and crops themselves are becoming even more demanding. And that producing more is no longer enough. Besides producing more, above all, what is being done more or what's being requested is higher quality. Therefore, optimizing water, climate, and fertilization is no longer just a technical option, but a strategic necessity. Regenerating, okay, isn't just about reducing inputs. It's not about watering less to produce less or to reduce inputs, but rather it's about understanding the entire system, which is soil, climate, and plant. It's also about intervening with technical criteria and, above all, adjusting irrigation to the physiology or the actual phenological state of the crop. And for that, well, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is what happens in the soil, okay? The soil is not just a support, but rather it is actually a living system where there is a physical part of the soil. Well, where you have the soil type, the porosity, and so on. This physical aspect includes things like the texture and structure of the soil, okay? On the other hand, when we look at the soil chemistry, which is where you find things like the conductivity, the pH level, and the various important nutrients, okay? And finally, the soil biology, which includes the microorganisms and the root system of the crop, okay? So when we understand what happens beneath our feet, well, we start to manage the crop with more precision. How do you have precise control of the soil? Well, the first thing is to do all these little drawings, okay? I call it doing an ultrasound of the soil. And in a soil ultrasound, if you notice, it's not just the soil itself that appears, but it's like a whole. Okay, because yes, here is the part where we are talking about the soil, but there are other factors I'll talk about later that are very important, which is where the climate comes in. Okay, moisture by profile shows where the actual water is, and conductivity detects accumulations and imbalances. And the temperature of the roots actually conditions and influences the plant's activity. Because when there is too much water present, you can cause root suffocation, which means the roots are not able to get enough oxygen. And when the opposite happens, meaning there is a lack of water, you can cause a blockage or put stress on the plant, which can negatively affect its growth. Therefore, precision in the soil is the basis of water efficiency. Consequences of well managed water control. Well, you get greater water use efficiency, so there is less loss from deep drainage, reduced nutrient leaching, improved root oxygenation, and a lower incidence of pathologies or plant diseases. Plus, you see more balanced and more functional root development overall. What consequence does that lead to? That if you have a controlled soil, in the end, you end up having a much more predictable crop. I should say that transpiration is determined by various factors like temperature, relative humidity, and radiation. Keep these three parameters in mind because they are quite important. I'll tell you that climate here for a long time has been seen is been seen as if irrigation, well, fertigation is the most important factor, but climate can be more important than irrigation. In the end, this is an entity where you ultimately have to find the balance, which is the word of the day today, right? And by having everything balanced, well, I'm sure that success will be achieved. Climate, okay, it regulates stomatal opening and therefore actual water consumption. This is where a parameter comes in that I'll talk about more specifically later, which is VPD. Nutrient absorption really depends directly on the transpiration flow, and a climate imbalance can generate stress even if you have already managed the soil issue correctly. That is exactly why I emphasize that climate is a truly fundamental factor. In in regenerative agriculture, it's not enough to look after the soil, it's essential to align climate and plant physiology. And as I said before, I'm going to talk about VPD, vapor pressure deficit, because it's a parameter that I find fundamental and it changes the way the crop is managed. VPD is the difference between the saturation vapor pressure and the actual vapor pressure of the air. Okay. It integrates temperature and relative humidity into a single parameter. Okay. It determines the evaporation gradient between the leaf and the atmosphere and regulates transpiration, stomatal opening, and sap flow. I should tell you that a plant starts to function when the VPD is between values of zero point 0.4 and 2.7 kilopascals. And the ideal values where the plant doesn't expend energy and is transpiring at 100% is when the VPD value is between 0.7, 0.8, and 1.7 kilopascals. Working with optimal VPD ranges, well, it allows for the synchronization of climate, irrigation, and plant physiology. Okay. As for applied technology in climate control equipment, well, there are about 20,000 options. Okay. For those with a traditional greenhouse, it is typical to have window and side vent controls for ventilation, which help regulate airflow and maintain a healthy environment for your plants. And really, there is not much else to it, okay? And if we are talking about those medium to high tech greenhouses, then we start getting into things like shading screens, heating systems, and also carbon dioxide control, right? And in the end, the important thing is to have automated control of temperature and relative humidity to maintain optimal VPD ranges. dynamic management of ventilation, screens, and heating based on physiological demand. So, from here is where we get a total integration of everything I have been talking about: data, soil, climate, and water. Integrating humidity, tension, conductivity, and soil temperature with VPD, radiation, and climate parameters is very, very interesting and very important when it comes to what I have been saying about making decisions at every moment, adjusting irrigation based on the real interaction between water availability and evaporative demand, simultaneous control of root physiology and stomatal behavior. And then I will say that coordinated management, which reduces variability, improves water efficiency, and stabilizes production. Therefore, regeneration does not depend on a single variable, but on the technical coherence between all of them. And finally, and one of the things I find most important is not just setting up the gadgets, but supporting and educating. Okay. So that they know how to use them, get the best performance out of them, and ultimately achieve success, right? Which means tracking the monitoring, interpreting the data in a personalized way, depending on the timing, the phenological state of the crop, the climate conditions, and so on. Then, carry out a periodic and carefully considered review of trends to anticipate potential future stress problems, and above all, to train you, the farmers, so that you know how to understand and interpret the readings of the different variables and can carefully adopt the most appropriate strategies or decisions. When technology is a tool, technical criteria are what guarantee a healthy and sustainable crop. In conclusion, controlling or having total control does not mean intervening more, but rather intervening better. It is knowing how the crop responds at all times. And I tell you that regeneration begins when we decide to measure and understand better. More control is more knowledge, and more knowledge is more respect for the crop and for the environment. Ultimately, in the end, when you manage the crop, you apply the right amount of water and fertilizer at the right time. You keep the plant much more balanced. Therefore, you have to use fewer pesticides because you have fewer disease problems. In the end, it ends up being a system that is more efficient in terms of energy, and it is more sustainable and more eco-friendly. I should mention that those of you who have registered will have the opportunity to download the document featuring 18 technical keys or tips to help you anticipate imbalances in irrigation, climate, and sensing. For example, one tip that is almost certainly included is when to clean the filters or how to clean them and things of that nature. Okay, and that is all. Thank you very much.
Great. All right. So let's start with my part of the talk, which is the last one. We're going to get straight to the point. So what's happening in the long term with different variables that affect soil quality? That's what we're going to see in the presentation. The first part, obviously, is to talk about the physical part, the fundamental problems we have in the physical part of the soil. The physical part, in the end, affects compaction and oxygenation. The root system of plants mainly looks for darkness, moisture, and oxygen. The fact that it looks for moisture to get water and nutrients and that it needs oxygen is a contradiction in itself, because you always have to maintain the optimal point between that moisture you have in the soil and the oxygenation that's there. But mainly those are the problems we're going to find at a physical level. It's been seen and proven that mineral fertilization is one of the big problems to solve, or those that cause many problems in the issue of soil compaction, and that evidently affects the final production of the crop at the end of the day. Here you can see, for example, a graph that shows how after 10 to 15 years, between 10 and 20 years, when intensive use of the soil is made, especially when it's being fertilized with mineral fertilization, the percentage of clays can even increase by 32%. It seems like a silly thing because we don't see it, but they are relevant data because they definitely affect the quality you're going to have in the management, in crop management. So low temperatures as the crops progress, you see that they have less management capacity, less capacity. What's happening? What's happening? The soils are compacting, the number of clays is increasing, and we have, as a consequence, less oxygen available for the plant, okay? Even after as many as 15 years have gone by, if we do absolutely nothing at all, just take a look. On average, the level of oxygenation actually decreases by as much as up to 20%. We provide different types of solutions. Right now, the two solutions we provide within what would be to be able to be used in organic, in ecological, would be the HM4 and the coconut fiber substrate called Naturfico, which is registered by Agrocolor and by the CAE. So what's done is that it's mixed. They're basically a massive boost of organic matter that gets mixed into the soil. HM4 is being used more to make a hole in the ground when you're doing the planting. And we can say that depending on the amount of substrate added, usually between half a liter to 750 cc or 1 liter of substrate is added to the soil. It's covered and planted right on top, and the plants take off like rockets. They start very well. It's a substrate that's being used a lot in the field. In very early plantings, like the ones we usually have, where the very small plant goes into the high heat phase, and we're getting very, very good results. And then in Naturfico, there's going to be a video in the presentation. There's a video you can see where it clearly explains how the 100% coconut fiber is added right in the mix with the soil. And then we put in the technical solutions here. We've also put that we have enfigonado boards. The enfigonado board is 100% coconut, but it's not allowed for organic use. That needs to be highlighted. Okay? So you don't get any surprises. And someone who wants to do organic farming, who opens the soil, who puts in an enfigonado board because it's considered that they're making a significant alteration to the natural environment. And, well, then for the physical part, there are products that are basically, if you're decreasing the soil porosity because the clays are increasing, you can act on the water by lowering the surface tension of the water. So use a surfactant regularly. And then what it does is that the water has a greater capacity to penetrate smaller pores, and therefore you have more easily available water. But it's not the definitive or ideal solution. The ideal solution is the addition of organic matter to the soil. As I've already mentioned, there you have a series of videos where you'll be able to see how it's installed. And what the crop results are using organic amendments with coconut fiber or HM4. Here, if you look, there's a little photo that can be seen because it's really caught our attention. This is an enfigonado board, and it really catches our attention that from the start, for example, in soils where there are nematodes, well, the plants don't suffer as much, or even inside the coconut fiber, we don't know exactly why, but the nematode doesn't go inside the fiber, it stays outside. It's probably due to a pH issue, or you're continuously having greater growth of absorbent hairs in the coconut fiber. But for example, these are curious things that we've been noticing as time has gone by, okay? The chemical part, which is super important. Here, what we're mainly going to see is what are the differences between using mineral fertilizer and organic fertilizer or a mixed fertilizer, right? Normally, when we're working with mineral fertilizer, what's been seen is a gradual loss of organic matter in the soil. This means you have to constantly be adding organic matter like you do by adding the crop residues. We also see soil acidification, which can be beneficial at times, but there's a specific issue with all the microbiology surrounding the root system that creates a symbiosis with it, as they're usually quite sensitive to neutral and acidic environments. So as soon as the soil pH starts to drop, we begin to see that the soils become more inert and have less capacity to defend themselves against diseases, okay? And of course, salinization, increased electrical conductivity, and a drop in microbial activity. We can summarize this into 5 fundamental points. The chemical part, 1 is the loss of organic matter with a conductivity increase of about 28% and a 17% decrease in organic matter. pH acidification, as I mentioned, a significant increase in salinization and soil conductivity, which reaches a point where soils become practically unmanageable, especially in the east, and as a result, a drop in microbial activity. And then we have the famous paradox of over-fertilization. Let's look at the data. Look, on this first slide, what we have is a relationship between organic matter and the relative electrical conductivity. That is, you can clearly see here that after 10 years, if you don't act by adding organic matter to the soil, the electrical conductivities are going to skyrocket. And as a result, the organic matter starts to drop as well at an accelerated rate. Therefore, the soil becomes much more sensitive. In this case, you have the pH part, how it's affected. For example, when we are using fertilizers simply by over-nitrogenating, or even when we use intensive NPK that is in excess, as you can see, there's practically no difference. The determining factor in mineral nutrition that negatively affects soil acidification is nitrogen. In other words, you can push hard with another element that won't have as much of a negative effect on the soil's pH as nitrogen does. So let's focus on the amounts of nitrogen that we are applying, okay, in mineral fertilization. In organic, we'll see now how the nitrogen inputs are. Via organic means these effects are not as severe. Salinization, well, you can see there, while, for example, here we have high doses of conductivity and medium doses of conductivity, the one that's a lighter orange. The darker orange represents conductivity at high doses. Well, after 15 years of repetitive use in the soil, we already exceed the thresholds that we could consider phytotoxic, or where the plant starts to significantly lower its productive potential as an effect of the increase in conductivity. In this case, what we see here is how it affects the total microbial biomass, the functional diversity of that biomass, and the enzymatic activity. Without mineral fertilizer, we would be at 100% with a medium dose of nitrogen, around 80 to 160 kilos per hectare. We would already have significant losses of around 20%. And when we go to very high doses of nitrogen inputs, well, the losses we would have in biomass and functional diversity would even exceed a 50% loss. And this is what I was telling you about the paradox of over-fertilization. That is, it reaches a point where even if I apply more nitrogen, the plant is not going to produce more. And so what I have is a completely negative effect, right? So that's important because sometimes we see crops that are stalled and we want to fix them with nitrogen. We want them to bulk up and we want to solve it with nitrogen. We keep pushing, for example, in seasonal crops like watermelon right now. Well, we're pushing very hard with nitrogen. We're making massive applications. I've even seen studies stating that in the Almeria countryside, even before planting, you already have 3 times more nitrogen in the soil than the plant needs. And that has severe negative effects on production. Imagine if it reaches a point where I am continuously over-fertilizing. And finally, well, let's move on to the part about microbiological regeneration, which is super important. We don't see it. It's there. It brings benefits, sometimes intangible, but nevertheless, not having it does cause very significant harm. So we're going to talk about the relationship between organic matter and diseases, which we were discussing earlier, regarding pathogen incidents, soil suppressiveness, which is the soil's ability to protect itself from diseases, and the difference between mineral, mixed, and organic fertilization. In this section regarding organic matter, for example, in relation to diseases, when it drops by about 28%, diseases usually spike above 50%. Pathogen incidents, well, with organic matter. This links back to what Ainhoa mentioned earlier in her presentation regarding the estimated organic matter percentages for establishing natural enemies. Besides that, with organic matter at or below 1.5%, you can have fusarium incidence from 45 to 78%, pythium up to 65%, rhizoctonia up to 58%, and sclero up to 42%. And as for soil suppressiveness, we see that with very low organic matter, below 1.5%, risks also skyrocket along with soil suppressiveness, right? And regarding mineral versus organic, mineral fertilization accelerates the loss of organic matter and biomass, as well as acidification and salinization. While organic increases organic matter, and therefore all the benefits we get in the soil, we can see it here. For example, this green line is the relative percentage of organic matter compared to the overall incidence of diseases. After 15 years, they're going to skyrocket. You can see a difference practically from the start. The moment organic matter starts to decrease, soil diseases begin to attack. But after 15 years, if we haven't acted, the exponential jump in disease incidence is just crazy. Another interesting point to highlight is the type of pathogen, Fusarium, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, and Sclero. With high organic matter levels above 3.5%, they are practically non-existent, or at least they are easily controlled. When we move to low organic matter, we already see incidences reaching up to approximately 50%. And if we drop below 1%, then the incidence of Fusarium especially becomes more than obvious. And here we see soil suppressiveness and the percentages of beneficial microbial activity. So here you can clearly see how, as soil suppressiveness or microbial activity decreases, these are linked variables that drop in an equivalent way. And yet, the risk of an epidemic starts to skyrocket. And above all, after just 10 years of cultivation without taking any measures, we can already face very high potential risks. Finally, here we have the comparison. In pink, we have what would be mineral fertilization, comparing it in green with organic fertilization, and in blue, a mix, okay? So how the relative percentage of organic matter is affected, for example, here you see in the comparison between mineral and organic fertilization, how we have much more organic matter with organic fertilization than with mineral. Microbial biomass, obviously, we're also going to have much more in organic fertilization. In pH control, in this case, it's exactly the opposite, meaning we'll have a much more acidic medium with mineral fertilization than with organic. Electrical conductivity is also significant, the differences we have in mineral fertilization compared to organic, okay? Then we have aggregate stability, that is, it's often said, for example, when adding humic acid acts as a chelating agent, okay? So you add humic acid and see a revitalization of the crop because everything there in the root environment where the humic acid has entered, the plant is able to assimilate it much more easily. And you also see the soil biodiversity, how it improves significantly with organic fertilization. Well, the summary of this microbiological part, here it is, but basically what we'd say is that decreases in organic matter definitely affect disease incidence and in very few years. You don't have to wait long before you start seeing significant problems associated with the lack of organic matter and biodiversity in the soil. Regarding the product lines we have at the company, right now we have more than 20 different references that are certified for organic use, where different types of solutions can be found. And then there are solutions that aren't certified for organic but are completely natural, which can really help with all of that ongoing maintenance of microbiological activity as well as the organic matter present in the soil, and can also help to alleviate all of the associated problems and issues that we have been seeing over time. And finally, I wanted to talk about the technological innovations that we are developing because, as I mentioned at the beginning, in addition to coconut fiber, we have a nutritional products factory, we have a laboratory, and we have research, R&D, right? So in this part, what we want to work with are with prebiotics, we could say, that help us ensure that the microbial activity, in the soil is completely fertile. We are investigating a couple of lines of work. Now we are going to see some results. Basically, it's the use of basic substances in combination with technology or with nanotechnology, right? Nanometrics means that we are starting to encapsulate with molecules that range from 10 to 100 nanometers in size. That is microscale, okay? With that, what you achieve is that we are going to have much better efficiency in the products, in the application products, in the treatments, using lower doses, fewer repetitions, right? The substances that are being used for this nanotechnology are the chitins that come from mollusks, from the shells of mollusks, and soy lecithin, right? And basically, I'm going to summarize it for you quickly. Imagine, for example, when we talk about microelements, that we have complex parts, which are normally salts, and then we have chelated parts, which are inorganic molecules that what they do is they capture a metal and make it available to the plant, okay? This would be making a chelate, but an organic one, based on an organic molecule, right? That is with different characteristics with a lipid layer. These are fats that bind by charge, by electric charge at that very small size. And inside that lipid layer, you place the matter that you want to use in question. And then it's easier for the plant to absorb it either via the stomata or via the roots. I'll show you some results. Look, here we have a product that is a calcium-based product, which is 8% FICO calcium. And we did a series of tests on zucchini crops, and we were investigating, let's see, wet weight, dry weight, stem length, and we did a control with just plain water, the product exactly as we had it formulated in the past, you could say, and the product applying nanotechnology. And these are the results we obtained. In wet weight, well, here we had, compared to water, well, here we have a difference of, here it was around 6-7 grams approximately, and yet with the normal calcium product, you were already at almost 9, and you have a little more. In wet weight, there wasn't a big difference compared to the normal product, the nanotechnology. Where we do start to see a more significant difference is in the dry weight. There you start to have a more important difference, and above all, where we definitely saw there was a difference was in the stem length. Now we'll see why. When we analyze the data regarding the increase compared to the control, the normal product increased a little less than 25% in wet stem weight. However, you were already at 30% with the nano product, right? In dry stem weight, we were exceeding with the normal product compared. For the control group, the value was just a little over 25%, but here, with the nano product, you are at around 35%. That means you already have a difference of about 10% improvement in terms of dry weight. And as for stem length, here the differences were, as I mentioned, more significant. This happened because of this circumstance. Those are electron microscope images of how the developing cells look inside the plant. So there you can see that, for example, with the normal product, there you had a length of 60, it's not very clear, but 65 microns compared to 83. And here we have another sample. Here you have 62 microns compared to 74. That is exactly why you achieved a slightly more and actually a significantly longer stem elongation with the product, because the cells themselves are basically quite a bit larger than before, as you can clearly see. When you look closely, it becomes even more apparent that the stem has become noticeably more extended, which is directly due to the increased size of the cells. And then, for example, we did another test with a product called Ficolux, which is a wetting agent, which will help the treatments wet properly, the mixture to spread well, and therefore have more efficiency in the treatments. So we did a first formulation, we could say standard. Then we have a second formulation that was already a bit more optimized, and the third formulation, which is already a nano. So I'm not sure if you can see it well here in the photo, but in the presentation, when you have it, you'll see it clearly. It's not silicone. It looks like silicone that's fallen on the leaf, but as for the treatment's efficiency in terms of how the droplet spreads on the leaf, it really gives us a strong sense of hope that the treatments we are developing and using now are going to be much more effective and successful than what we saw with the old technologies in the past, right? Physics, from a physical standpoint, to summarize, watch out for compaction. Clays are gradually year by year increasing, decreasing organic matter and causing potential disease risks to skyrocket. Regarding the chemical part, watch out for organic matter loss, which has a direct impact on soil acidification and therefore the enzymatic activity we have. The microbiological part, when we drop below 1.5% organic matter, the soil's suppressiveness ends up practically collapsing. And so we have an inert medium, difficult to control from a disease standpoint. And then the technological aspect, well, it leads us to research new technologies that make products that are completely organic, of natural origin. What we're going to try, although I know it's a challenge, but it's ambitious, is to have the same level of efficiency that chemicals have historically been able to have, but from an exclusively organic and 100% sustainable side. You're going to have a helpful and informative handout we've made there with a series of recommendations on how to interpret sap values, conductivity, pH when we see a sap analysis, which helps you quite a bit to see the nutritional status of the crop. I don't remember right now how you could get that, but I think you'll get it with your registration. When an email is sent to you, you can download it. And that's all. Now, if you'd like to ask a question, we're here. Okay, thank you very much.